So I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight. Thanks for coming. I'm sorry that so many people have missed this because I think it's absolutely fascinating to see how the blockchain is going to change the music industry. We have already had a panel on how the blockchain's affecting the media, but this is really fascinating stuff to me, and it will be recorded, and obviously it's being live streamed. So I want to thank the panelists, and I want to thank Peter for Skyping in with us, and I just want to introduce Bill from Shepherd Mullen. He's just going to say a few words. Do you want to come up here, Bill? So.
Yeah, you go grab a microphone.
So thanks to Shepherd Mullen for supporting us, growing this ecosystem, and providing the drinks and the venue, both in San Francisco and here all this year. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much and welcome. This is an exciting year for Shepherd Mullen. We're 90 years old this year, and so we're an old firm but still interested in new and exciting technology. We're a full-service firm with nearly 800 lawyers and 15 offices around the country, and we're very proud and happy to sponsor these. So welcome and enjoy. Thank you.
Great. Well, Pimo stepped out, so I'm going to take over right now. So with that, first of all, very happy to have you all here. As you know, we do these regularly, and each Pimo really puts together a great program. So I'm always excited to get involved any way I can. Today's no different. Music in the blockchain. And, you know, I've been watching the blockchain space evolve for a long time now. To have this team here to discuss it, I think is going to be very exciting. I prepared some questions, which I also shared with them, but I'm going to refer to them a little bit as we're having a conversation. And you know, before we get started, I think it's always interesting before we hit the blockchain's questions that we really level set a little bit about the market we're going to talk about. And in this case, we're talking about the music industry. And with that, it'd be great to understand the roles that each of you have played in the music industry as you come at this problem. And just because we got Peter on virtual setup, we're going to start with you, Peter, if that's okay. Okay. And the crowd does not know who you are. Maybe they do, but let's get you to explain what roles you've played. I think you've done a few things here.
Sorry, Peter, you're going to introduce everyone, correct? Thank you.
Yeah, we're good. Okay, sorry about that, Peter. Go for it.
So I've been doing this virtually my whole life. I started.
Sorry, Peter. When you say virtually, you mean that, right? Because you're virtual right now.
Right. Yeah, nothing I say is literal. In fact, I started. Well, I grew up. First of all, I'm third generation entertainment industry. My great uncle created the first film with sound, a musical called The Jazz Singer. My father created the first TV show with music, bands doing like music videos called The Monkees. And I grew up in a very innovative environment during the 60s and 70s, which really kind of was the pinnacle of the independent film revolution, right? But when it came to the music industry, there were a lot of barriers to entry. A good example is just being able to record, the barrier of production itself. You couldn't make your own demos. You couldn't create music alone, right? These were things that required technology, production, tools, studios, money, locations, all kinds of barriers. And through technology, I was an early adopter, not only of DARPANet and of CompuServe, but also the actual production technologies. Before there were things like MIDI, I was involved in collecting and learning. I started out as a guitar player. I faked my way through music school while I was still in high school. And by the end, I became a working studio musician. But playing in bands and such, I realized that I didn't want to be dependent on people who were not necessarily reliable. So I went out one night after having a bad experience at the Troubadour nightclub, a famous club in Los Angeles, where the lead singers of the group I was in both passed out because they were too drunk. And the next morning I went and I bought my first synthesizer and my first sequential circuits voltage controlled synthesizer. And that was the beginning of my lifetime romance with technology. And I became a real expert at a young age. I used to consult with Apple, and by the time the Apple Masters program came about in the early 80s, I was the youngest member of that. That was sort of like a think tank at the CAA building in Los Angeles, where Apple set up their sort of evangelist. It ultimately became QuickTime, but the bottom line was I was involved in that, and I was consulting to massively large companies, Microsoft, Compaq, Apple. You know, these were like 100-page NDAs that I was signing as a kid. Meanwhile, I was writing hit songs, and I continued to develop studios, production. It all culminated, and although people thought of these areas as very different businesses, for me, as a young writer and musician and technologist, I became an independent businessman. Now, I also wrote some massively successful songs, and I'll give you a quick anecdote. I spent a year and a half demoing in a studio that I didn't own a song called Open Your Heart, and I wanted Cindy Lauper to record this song, but I had no access. So one night while the song was being mixed, I heard that there was a tape, a reel-to-reel tape going over to Madonna's office, and I wanted to ask the people at the studio if they would be kind enough to put my demo on the tape for her to hear, and they said no. And that night I put on a ski mask and broke into the studio. I literally broke in with a Walkman cassette player, battery operated, and manually transferred the song onto the reel-to-reel. She did hear it, and I was told that I didn't have any success there because nobody knew that it was my song. Of course, I hadn't written anything on the box. People who had their names on the box thought it was their song.
So Peter, Peter, that's a role I did not add to the list of roles that one might have played. Night Thief. Yeah, Felon was not in the list. I appreciate it. But it is a role that is played in the music industry, right?
I would say it's a prerequisite. No, but in all honesty, the reason I'm bringing this up is because when the album finally was pressed, and they pressed, I think, 600,000 units, I decided to let the cat out of the bag, and I called Madonna's lawyer, and I said, listen, I know this may come as a shock to you, but that's my song. And of course, they thought I was trying to, be fraudulent about this, and I played them the same song with my voice on it. You can find this online, Peter Rafelson's demo of Open Your Heart. And they freaked out, and they said, we'll call you back. They called me back, and they said, look, you have to give up all your rights to this song and your publishing, or it won't go on the album. And I knew that they'd already pressed 600,000 copies. So I just said, no problem, take it off. And ultimately they didn't, and ultimately it sold 30 million plus copies. Now here's the interesting thing. I kept my own rights. I didn't have a publishing deal. I made some collections deals for these things. But the point I'm making and how it's going to relate to this panel is that very early on in life, I controlled tremendously valuable rights, and this is what inspired me ultimately and required me to not only become a businessman, but to find ways to monetize and to manage and administrate those, and hence I refer back to you. But that's gives you an insight into my past.
Yeah, I like the fact that they thought you were a fraud, when in reality you were a fraud, but for a different reason. That was good. I like the way you threw that in, though. That was good. So let's move to you guys. Let's get a little bit of background on the areas you've played in this industry, but let's start with you, Bryce.
I, in my misspent youth, was a FM radio DJ on a mid-market station in Dayton, and also a couple stations in Indiana, and also did some outdoor concert production. And then, as most people do, they get married and have children and have to put away their toys and get real jobs. So I moved into software development, but never lost that appreciation for music and the industry and wanting to be a part of it. So when finally my technology career evolved to the point where I could begin to insert myself back into the entertainment industry, I jumped in with both feet, awesome. and here we are today.
Awesome, awesome. Kamal?
Well, just as we spoke a little bit earlier, my interface came with fraud. So I'm a certified.
So you and Peter have a lot in common.
Yeah, we actually, since Peter and I are both on the same side, we're trying to combat fraud in the industry.
Is that a prison shower?
So, what I saw with this particular project is that utilizing the blockchain can actually cut down and minimize fraud. That's how I got to meet Bryce, and I wanted to know, well, there's so many cryptocurrency projects out there. What sets yours apart from others? And also, let's see how genuine this project is. How accessible am I to Bryce, the other people in the community, and is this a real thing?
Cool.
And in that, I got a little bit more immersed in me also coming out of bribery and corruption research. You also see similarities in the music industry, like payola, and how money can be laundered through the music industry as well, and of course piracy as well. So these are things that hopefully we can address with blockchain technology. And
well, for sure. I mean, Bitcoin is great for moving money seamlessly and without tracking. So I think the payola piece will be easy with Bitcoin.
Yeah, definitely.
So this is the thing that again I'm always struck by whenever dealing with blockchains, the notion of blockchain in an industry. And so I want to stay with the background a little bit further and really start to address the problems that each of these roles have in the industry today. Not talking about blockchain, we're still trying to understand what is the problem that the participants in the industry, and so I look at the participants, I see the artists, I see the producers, I see the labels, I see retailers, so there's a whole group of participants in this ecosystem. So let's try to dig in a little bit in terms of what do we think some of the problems are that we think this may eventually will bring the blockchain into effect. And why don't we start with you this time, Bryce?
All right. A lot of the issues are, back in 2014, there was this attempt by some industry leaders in the music industry to create what was known as the Global Repertoire Database, or GRD. And it tried to bring a whole bunch of people together in order to essentially come up with common data standards, and everybody was going to cooperate, and it was going to be wonderful, except it wasn't, because nobody liked each other, everybody had a competitive angle, everybody wanted to play their own role.
Not to. What's the problem they were solving?
Oh, the problem was the universality of the necessary metadata elements of a piece of music. Mm-hmm. Who owns what rights, and how much do they own, and what representation does that right have on, for instance, when you, the consumer, play the song? Mm-hmm. Whose name gets displayed, and how, and in what order? Mm-hmm. All of those things are very particular instances that are negotiated. And there's no common language for as vast as the music industry is, there's no common language in the music industry in order to disseminate that information.
Now, is that a problem for the artist, for the label,
It is a problem
for the
for
producer?
everyone.
Really? So
For
everybody?
everyone.
Okay, I see.
And honestly, it doesn't matter what part of the ecosystem you come at.
Uh-huh.
It is, I mean, and even that was, part of Peter's anecdote.
Yeah.
He didn't get his credit
Mm-hmm.
for his songwriting credit.
Right.
And how to prove that.
Right.
Peter took those steps in order to guarantee the provenance of his work. So even after it went to press and even after he didn't get any credit for it, he was still able to prove that credit.
Mm-hmm.
And those awards were able to be provided for him.
Mm-hmm.
That worked because there is no central database.
Got it.
In a world, for instance, that would have been much harder to pull off.
Yeah.
In a world with blockchains, because everybody would be able to see very accountably where each piece of content came from, that everybody who touched it
Mm-hmm.
in order to bring that piece of content to market.
Got it. Wow. Okay, great. Come on.
Yeah, I think I'm going to defer to Peter on
Okay.
this one.
Okay.
because,
Hey, Peter. So look,
quite
you are
experience that.
you are the guy in this.
It touches everything.
Yeah. What's
It
the
touches
problem?
everything. So, look, I talked about what are closed systems, but everybody that you mentioned is in fact, to some degree or another, a closed system. There's no interoperability between most of these not only organizations but companies, and there's certainly no standards. And that's always been true of most industries to some degree, although you have things like UPC codes or ISRC codes, work codes, but they're not readily available, and they're not digested, and they're not shared properly. And one of the things that I imagine we'll be talking about, and I actually am thrilled to be talking with Bryce, because he's a genius. This man is one of the smartest people I've ever spoken to about this very subject, is how to connect these different systems. Now, the problem, okay, I've been in every one of those roles, and by the way, I don't think people realize this, but by simply humming a song, I could hum a song right now and make it up right now, and it could be me alone in front of all these people watching, and there would be no less than 9 sets of rights to that one song. You've got a writer, a composer, an arranger, a lyricist, you've got a publisher, you've got an artist, you've got a label, you've got a distributor, and the creators and the contributors, it could all be one person, me, but all of those rights exist separately. And now imagine doubling that. Now there's 18 sets of revenue streams, just by bringing somebody else into the business.
So wait, so in that scenario, the problem you're describing is one of the accountability, or how we distribute royalties or whatever you're doing in that, because each of those roles is a role that has its own set of problems, right? In other words, you might play multiple roles, but in each role, you're dealing with a different set of problems than in the other role. So as we try to solve for something.
Well, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. But the solution, to some degree, used to be what's known as, to some of you who are old enough, an album cover. This actually had information. You could look at an album and see who the publishers were, and see who the writers were, and see who the artists were, and you could see who the label was. You could even maybe see who the manager was. But the point is, the revenue streams went somewhere, and it was notated. There were also special thanks and notes and things. So, granted, that's still not official, and it's still not available to everybody, and you still might have had a physical copy to see what was notated. But that was the beginning of what we call the credits conundrum, right? And in the end, that's data points, and that's what guys like Bryce and myself are most interested in, is being able to help a system that first has the information and secondly then can make good by executing with that information, executing a contract, executing a license, offering permission, distributing, managing, collecting, accounting, all of these pieces of general business at large are directly related to the music business. It's a fascinating industry because it faces similar challenges, but I would say more than most other businesses.
So are these? So you told us this great story with the Madonna thing, and in the end, it seemed like you got royalties from that, and you managed to get your rights. In other words, today this is all happening, right? So what is broken about these things? Since artists are getting money, they are getting paid. All the things you just described, I presume, are happening because you realize they're happening. Credits are there. Pieces of music are licensed to movies, to TV shows, to individuals. So, again, what is the breakage here? What's broken? Because I want to get to that, because as we talk about blockchains, we really want to say what are they good for, and then talk about how these two things came together so nicely.
Yeah. When you talk about the digital content supply chain, there are probably 10 links in that chain from creation to consumer that currently are linear. You have a creator or a writer starts with this, then they go through the production, then it goes and gets sent out to a publisher, then the publisher is involved in the rights that the edit recorded commercially, then the label receives the commercial recording, then the label uses an aggregator or may have its own distribution, and then the distribution goes out to a DSP or a platform, and then the consumer at the end. All of these are linear. There's no way to go from one to the other without going through that order I just mentioned. Now, it's a shame to think that I can't let somebody else in this universe receive or contact or distribute to them directly without having to go through all of those other pieces. And every one of those pieces is another hand in the pie. Granted, we all have to make a living. That's fair. But if I don't need to use them, I'm still currently forced to use them. Granted, I may be my own label, I may be my own publisher, but I still need to go through an aggregation to get onto a DSP and a distributor, right? In theory, all of this could be rewritten in a way that allows any people to then be accounted to directly. Now let me explain what I mean. So now we've gone through all of these 12 or 10 steps, the path, the content, supply chain. Now let's do it in reverse. It's called getting paid. It's the revenue streams. They go through the reverse process. The DSP pays the aggregator, pays the distributor, pays the label, pays the publisher, pays the artist, pays the writer. And that's 20 steps to get a penny. And if any one of them is not transparent or efficient or has their shit together, it's a lost cause.
Excellent.
You don't get a...
Excellent. Okay, no, that's helpful. That's really helpful. And so, look, I think let's touch a little bit on blockchain, but I want to move quickly to hearing about the Tao network, because I think that you guys are applying the blockchain to this problem. But let's touch first, Bryson, if I'll push on you a little bit. Let's touch on what's the blockchain good for, and then we can get into the Tao.
Oh my. And you know, depending on who you ask,
Yeah.
you're going to get a different answer every time.
Okay.
And
I've asked a lot of people.
No,
I do this for a living.
right, I get that. And everybody's correct all at the same time. Because the technology is so multifaceted, and it is, one of the things, for instance, people say it's a distributed database.
Mhm.
It's easier to say what it's not in comparison to other things that people think it is, and a definition sort of arises out of that. There's really no academic definitions for any of this. You can't go to school and get a degree in blockchain engineering. So, it is kind of up for grabs.
Okay.
So we can talk about what it's not.
Okay.
If it's not a distributed database. A distributed database requires authentication systems. It requires somebody somewhere to manage a set of users and the rights those users have to that data. If you think about a blockchain as a distributed database where the user credentials are built in to the data itself, then it becomes a little bit easier to understand. Because then you don't care who has the data, or who hosts the data, or where you got the data from, because you as a user can prove who you are and what you have the right to do. So now we get into rights management very, very quickly. To what you have the right to do based upon the cryptographic keys that you have. And for instance, in Bitcoin, the only thing you have the right to do is send and receive Bitcoin. That's all it's good for. So just to kind of segue into what I think was your next question, was what we did at Tao was we started with Bitcoin. There are tons of blockchain platforms out there. Bitcoin is the only open source blockchain platform that actually works, that people have been using for 8 years. It has been beat up, it has been vandalized, it has been besmirched, and it still exists. It is a robust, secure software platform. So we started with the most secure blockchain there is, and then slowly modified certain features based on my experience. I've launched, goodness, at least a dozen blockchain networks that have been publicly traded. I've consulted.
When you say publicly traded, what do you mean?
Blockchains can be public or private.
Yeah.
And public blockchains generally are traded on the open market.
Oh, are you talking like what's happening with the ICO market?
Absolutely. Well, not ICOs. I've only done one ICO, and that was Tao.
Okay.
All of the other ones were free launched.
Okay.
Which is you create the software, you put it out there.
Is this like Litecoin maybe?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
That's an excellent Dogecoin. It's another excellent example.
Okay.
Where it's sort of a community-based effort,
Yes.
and then it becomes monetized because of the popularity.
Got it.
So from that experience, was able to discern, number one, what kinds of blockchain technologies would be applicable, because there's little subtleties in the technology and how it's implemented that each platform lends itself to a better purpose. And so rather than build a general purpose platform, for instance, like Ethereum, I took my knowledge of Bitcoin and implemented it in a very specific manner, catering towards intellectual property rights. So very small, subtle changes from the Bitcoin blockchain in order to accommodate intellectual property. And just to give you an idea, Peter had outlined how in just one song, you can have 9 different right holders. So if you think about something like, and this is my favorite example, Psy's Gangnam Style. If you look on YouTube, Psy's Gangnam Style has something like 2.6 billion views.
Yes.
Times 9. Because that's how many rights holders minimum exist on that song. So now we're talking about 18 billion minimum transactions. For
There was more than that, because there was 3 or 4 contributors at least, plus the artist. So multiply that by 4.
And when we talk about things like transaction volume, and I don't think that people really appreciate what that means at scale in the music industry, specifically in the realm of rights management. We are literally talking about millions and billions of transactions every minute.
Yeah.
And because at scale. And so, that's where we started to focus. Where can we implement the technologies that, number one, can accommodate the use case, and number two, can accommodate the use case should it actually succeed.
And sorry, and this is running as a separate public blockchain. It is not a part of the Bitcoin block. Okay.
That's correct. This is based on the Bitcoin source code.
Good.
And then modified for this specific application and then launched independently.
Got it.
And it's currently publicly traded in the markets.
Got it. So that's really interesting. And maybe you can touch on how do you guys secure that? You know, one of the interesting things with Bitcoin is its inherent security because of the size, the number of nodes, protection against attacks. And really this is something that most public blockchains today are a little bit at risk because they're not big enough. Right?
That's true.
And so, but there's nothing to worry about when it's not being used. So, you know, you only secure what's worth securing.
That's right.
Bitcoin is worth securing. You know, arguably some of the smaller blockchains are not that problematic because nobody's going to steal it. So the issue of the Tao network as a securable blockchain is maybe not yet a problem, but as soon as billions of transactions and artists' work and stuff like this starts making its way through this is a big problem, right?
And if you think about, you know, the Bitcoin market cap is around $30 billion.
Mm-hmm.
And Spotify said the global market for music rights, to sound recordings, was $24 billion.
Uh-huh.
So we already see that within that market, there's an equivalency there already. So for Tao Network, you know, I mentioned how we implemented specific sorts of blockchain technology implementations in order to build this. One of the things we did was got rid of proof of work and instituted something known as proof of stake.
Got it.
So what that does is it incentivizes individuals to go out and purchase the coin, and then they actually receive an interest payment from the network for doing so.
Mm-hmm.
And what they know is that they are directly participating in the securing of rights for the artists. That psychological benefit has attracted an enormous number of individuals who have just bought and held the coin, and they have no intention of selling it because they know that they're helping bring about this change in the music industry. They are directly participating in it by buying the coin and then staking it in order to generate the blocks and generate that network security.
So it's almost an empathetic play.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that we felt that was very important to set that tone when we launched the network, so we could then make the argument, this is the public.
Yes.
These are the consumers that artists want to reach. And here's a community of consumers that agree, you know, that things need to change, and they are willing to put up their own funds and their own technology in order to bootstrap this process and get it going and bring artists to this and show them, to demonstrate how powerful this technology can be.
Wow. Wow, that's pretty, getting the size, it's going to be great to watch. You know, there's a number of blockchain participants in this marketplace trying to nail this problem, these sets of problems. This royalty issue, I think, is a tricky one that everybody recognizes as tough. You know, and so when I start to think about that, I'm like, wow, this is definitely worth tackling, and whoever is able to pull it off is going to have a huge opportunity in front of them. So, you know, as I was doing some research on all of this, you know, I know that Ujo is out there, and they're more of an Ethereum-based model. You've got Descent, which is doing some things in this space. And another company that is not really a blockchain company, but is trying to solve this problem is Patreon in a very different way.
Very true.
You
Very
know,
true.
and I think as well as Library and Monograph were two others that came up. So how do you characterize or set out this ecosystem? What's it look like? How will we differ? How should we think about these things differently?
Everybody is kind of approaching the various problems in the music supply chain from particular perspectives. And quite frankly, some of them are simply self-interested. The technology is not magnanimous by implementation. In fact, quite the opposite. It can be implemented in order to institute incumbency. So when one evaluates these various projects, you sort of have to take a look at the approach and think about the world that the approach would create. And then take all the projects together and think about what all that means if they all try to start working together and competing. And it starts to look very ugly very quickly. We started knowing this. We came from this environment. We saw how people took Bitcoin and launched thousands of altcoins. We know that once someone gets a good idea, there's going to be 50 different people giving it a shot. So we said, all right, so instead of doing that, why don't we work on what we know, which is blockchain technology, and integrating all of the data that's generated from all of these disparate various solutions that, literally you could come up with a solution in your garage and start producing your own music rights on your own blockchain in your own garage. And that's as valid as anything else, as long as it's publicly available data. And so how do we integrate? What are the things that all blockchains have in common that we can use to integrate this data together and aggregate it so that it can be provisioned to things like distributors and publishers and DSPs in a format that they want to see it? And that's where we came up with when we launched this last month, which was the Infinity Protocol, which kind of rides on top of the Tao blockchain and can literally consume data from other blockchains. So there was a real potential for a few minutes there of a format war, essentially, because there's no standard, there's no guideline, there's no nothing. You can do anything you want, but DSPs and publishers and distributors need data because they are legally bound to publish certain things because that's what PROs use in order to collect royalties and make sure everybody gets paid.
Right.
So somewhere in that process, somebody has to take on the burden of massaging that data and bringing it all together. And in the music industry previously, nobody could really accomplish that. But in the blockchain space, we have the opportunity to integrate. If you're truly a public and open blockchain platform, we can read your data. We can interact with your data, and we don't need you to tell us that we can't. That's what it's about.
Yeah.
So if it's really an open blockchain system, we can go in there, consume that data, and then aggregate it to all of the individuals in the supply chain in exactly the manner that they want to see it. And the individual blockchain networks themselves don't have to worry about it. They can focus on whatever problem it is they're looking to solve, and then know for sure that that information will reach the right parties further on down the line.
Got it. Wow. Great. Kamal, this notion of this integration of blockchains from has it been messed with? Who are the legitimate participants putting information in? From a fraud detection perspective, it seems daunting in the sense that I'm less worried about once it's in there, I'm worried about how it gets in there. How do you start to tease this apart to say, can this work? Can this notion of these different blockchains and the traceability of issues be addressed?
Well, I think if you have a public blockchain, you can always go to the block explorer and look at what's coming in, what's going out, and what direction it's going in. So I think that's one way of looking forensically at where is data going, who has access to the data, and like you said, who is it going to and what direction it's going to. Tao blockchain is a public blockchain, and so one of the first things I did was started to look at the Explorer, look at, who has so many tokens and so many wallets? How many wallets are there? And which tokens are moving between which wallets? Are there people sharing tokens, or are they going on exchanges? And so I think very similar to that concept, it's going to be opened up to all the different stakeholders. And when someone, maybe such as myself or an auditor, needs to come in on behalf of one of those other stakeholders to see, okay, is this data coming in correctly? What we're going to use is a block explorer to really look at the forensic movement of that data in those rights.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I hear that, and I think that the thing that strikes me is when we start to talk about other blockchains feeding in, then it's no longer about just this. It's, if I've got things coming in from others who are integrating with me, then I also have to worry about those other things and their provenance and their situation. So it's a daunting problem.
It is. And this creates a new cottage industry.
Yeah.
So,
right.
All the
You'll be
intermediaries.
employed for a long time.
Well, I'd like to. I want to listen to a lot of music too in the meantime. But I think there's a lot of intermediaries in the music space who think of blockchain as, okay, I'm going to lose my job. Now that blockchain is going to start to be implemented.
Yeah.
And so here's a way for those intermediaries to pick up some new business and act on behalf of, whether it's the music companies or the artists, and say, hey, this is how I bring value to the table. You just thought I was one of these people who just kind of skimmed a little bit of money off the top. This is how I'm bringing value. This is my value proposition. And I think, like I said, this is going to be a new way for them to legitimize their place in the music industry,
Cool.
in this new music industry.
Hey, Peter, have you seen any of these other blockchain solutions? Is any of that, have you contrasted and compared the different things that are out there? I mean, I think Ujo has, what's her name? Who's the woman who's...
Imogen Heap.
Imogen Heap, there she goes, yeah. And there's a whole bunch of them that are doing stuff.
I don't want to bust anybody's chops, and I don't want to burst any bubbles.
No.
But
By the way, you're only feeding into Facebook, so only millions of people are seeing you. So don't worry, it's only between us.
No, I have a high respect and a high regard for everybody that's been developing their solution. It doesn't work with the current conditions and assumptions and the practical silos that exist today. Okay, when I say silos, I mean areas of the business that are not opened, right? These are closed silos that quarantine, whether it be money, rights, artists, content, distribution, actors, etc. My personal approach, and listen, I'm just one other guy that thinks he may have an idea, a good one, was to reverse engineer down to the smallest minutia, the building blocks of the music business, and then start with each one of those building blocks to create the rights information that apply to them, and then reconstruct within the guidelines of today's industry. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not going to change. It will change. People postulate that PROs will be something of the past in 5 to 10 years. My personal feeling is that you cannot dismiss what has been in existence for 200 years. There are reasons for this, okay? If you want to make a proprietary system that says it's our way or the highway, I don't think it's going to fly. I think it's genius, but I just don't think it's going to fly. I don't think every single person who may not even be in a position to choose to leave behind their current accounting systems or their current corporate policies or their current bylaws in an operational agreement are just going to jump ship. I think that the answer is to find systems that innovate, create new models, but that support pre-existing ones. It's.
But here's where I'm often challenged in the blockchain ecosystem. When you see people selling enterprise software licenses, you can have a sales team that goes out to every company and sells them enterprise software, whether it's an ERP system or tracking, accounting, whatever. When you get into the blockchain ecosystem, you can't do that. It is an ecosystem sale, which means all the participants have to be involved.
You can't do that if it's what Bryce referred to as public and open, because you can't hold anybody ransom.
No. I think you misunderstood. I think what I'm saying is that they all have to play. In other words, you can't have like 10 artists using this and none of the labels, and it's going to fly, right? In other words, the labels have to buy in. The artists have to buy in. The producers have to buy in. everyone has to buy in.
Interesting question you raised, and I'd like to address that because I created a platform called DigiRAMP, and DigiRAMP allows any user or any link in that supply chain to opt in, to manage, to administrate, and to input data. But it doesn't require that everybody necessarily use it. It's a way to take note of, manage, to notify all of those stakeholders, and to participate. However, I'll give you an example. I've got Open Your Heart up there. I'm one of 3 writers. There's 6 publishers. The Warner's has the master rights. UMG or the Warner's Music Group is the distributor. I added every one of those pieces of data, each being a separate data point, each being that minutia that we reverse engineered down to the minimal amount of information. And in doing so, I could only account for what it is that I am responsible for, my identity, my personal rights, my publishing rights, my share, right? But by adding that information in, every one of those other stakeholders receives a notification, and they can choose whether or not they want to corroborate, to confirm, and to opt in to receive monies from that source. So it's and by the way, the same thing goes in reverse. I still wait for my checks from Warner Brothers when they have money for me. But the difference is I'm giving everybody the choice to do that directly, in addition to what they're still beholden to, which is the older systems. We can interopt between all the PROs.
Wait, are you using a blockchain?
We're not. We
Oh,
are.
wait a minute. I'm sorry. I think we have the wrong guy on the panel. I thought we were going to have a blockchain conversation.
Well, and if I could, I mean, this is one of the things that's really important because blockchain technology is so new, and folks like Peter have only just now cracked the rights management nut.
Mm-hmm.
So for these blockchain systems to say that they've got it figured out, and here's a music industry veteran, 3 generations, who has just now figured it out and doesn't have a blockchain underneath it yet. That sounds like fun to me.
Yeah.
This is why I'm here today. The truth is, I basically created a system. It's open to the public. The only person that controls the data, if you really want to get down to it, is Amazon, because that's where the content is hosted, right? But in the end, one step further, and we've got the whole pie, and that's with doing something like Bryce is doing. And I want to be able to take all of that data and those decentralized databases, if you will, and spread them, ubiquitously through a blockchain that is also going to be open to all of those other, like I said, silos. I have had to embrace these silos my whole life, and I'm not going to be the guy that says, "Fuck you all, I'm doing my way." Beep.
Sorry, I was late on that. Sorry.
So that's not me. I want this to work for you guys and your stockholders and your public trading, and I also want it to work for kids with GarageBand or an iPhone that have no benefit, and if those 2 extremes can see eye to eye, we've got it. It's over.
All right. So there's a trope that and I'm sorry. Were you guys?
No, I was just giving him a thumbs up. I totally agree.
Awesome. So look, there's a trope that's been out there for a while. When Pharrell's song went on Pandora, and 43 million streams of Happy were heard, and so the word was he made less than $3,000. Now, what I want to understand from that trope is a few things. So, Peter, I don't actually think I'm much. We're far off in age and time. but I know that when I bought an album, I could listen to that album as many times as I wanted, and nobody was counting it as a stream. Even though each time I listened to it, it's the equivalent of a stream. But I could listen to it over and over and over again. And nobody was complaining, and I wasn't getting calls from artists. It was like I had a one price, and I could eat as much as I wanted of my albums, okay? So when I hear 43 million streams, I think back to, gee, if I had that album, you know. So what is the economics that was it a tracking problem for Pharrell that he only got $3,000? Was it that people feel it's unfair because he somehow would have gotten a different amount if people were forced to buy the album?
You mind if I?
Yeah.
You mind if I jump into this one, Peter? First of all, like Spotify and Pandora and YouTube, they have fixed those problems. Nobody in 2017. It doesn't matter if you're an independent label or a major label. There is somebody out there that will represent you and interface. I mean, A2IM literally just signed that deal with YouTube.
Oh, no.
About a week or two ago.
So now they're tracking everything?
Right. So now they're tracking everything, and now it's all about content IDs and whatever.
So was that a tracking problem on the Pharrell
Well,
issue?
it could be, and see, that's the thing, it's really complex. It could have been any number of individuals within that supply chain between Pharrell and Pandora. It could have been his management. It could have been his distributor. It could have been, you know, and I'm gonna point fingers only because they're working on fixing it. Harry Fox, HFA. It was so, they were like the biggest Luddites in the entire music industry. They couldn't even figure out how to fill out the form for iTunes and Spotify correctly. And essentially what happened was it ended up for them getting bought by Rumblefish, and then they came in, you know, Blackstone Group, and they came in and fixed it.
Yeah.
But they were that backwards. So to say that it was really a function of Pandora,
Right.
or that there was some sort of nefariousness going on, 2014 is not 2017.
Good.
And the landscape is significantly different now than it was back. Nothing like that would ever happen today.
Got it.
And I mean, I'm a blockchain guy.
Well, yeah, so,
You know,
so
I mean,
this is
we're
interesting.
looking at disrupting this stuff, and if you're looking at disrupting it, you have to be honest about the way the ecosystem currently exists. And artists actually are getting paid.
Got it. So the tracking piece is figured out. It's now the tracking of the participants within a song.
The transparency part.
Yeah, got it.
The tracking is good, but is anybody lying?
Yes.
That's the part that hasn't
Got
really
it.
been filtered out.
Well, hang on. When we say lying, lying that they were involved in the song, or lying about the number of streams?
How much money goes on to the next party? Because like Peter said, it goes up and down.
Yeah.
And if somebody, you know, you have to see a series of double checks. You know, we always talk about consensus. Right?
Yeah.
So if you know how much came out of Spotify to the PRO, and then the PRO gives to the distributor, and they don't have, you know, there's a discrepancy in there as to how much the PRO is supposed to take.
Yep.
You know who you're supposed to complain to.
Yeah.
Do you know that Spotify is not lying to you? Do you know that Pandora is not lying to you? Do you know that YouTube is not lying to you? That assurance isn't quite there yet.
So this A2IM thing, is it, you know, I think of things like ASCAP and BMI as, at least in the radio and terrestrial world, as the kind of equivalents of this tracking issue. How is A2IM a translation of that onto the digital world, where they're...
No, it's literally the independent label's answer to the RIAA. It's an industry like an SRO almost.
What's an SRO?
A self-regulatory organization, where it's a consortium of individuals in a particular industry get together and form a group so they can get together and have a voice in conjunction. The RIAA typically is consistent of the three major labels,
Right.
and you know they're hangers-on. A2IM is everybody else.
Got it.
So and they're very proud of that fact.
So when there's plays on Pandora or Spotify or iTunes, is the reporting requirements being offloaded to whatever they say is what happened, or is there independent validation of their numbers?
What does the guy who gets paid for it from it say?
Peter,
What's the question?
when you have when Spotify and Pandora and iTunes, when they're reporting the streams that are being played off their services, is that independently validated, or does everyone have to take their word for it?
No, and this goes back to your question. the question is not whether Pharrell didn't get a dime from Pandora. They're not paying him. They're paying everybody that comes before him.
Right.
He didn't put it on TuneCore himself, and it went up to Pandora, right? So you have to. The question is really, how much money did that recording generate, right, from the stream, and then what portion of the money that was accounted wound up making it into the producer and or writer's hands. And that could be governed by countless contracts. You could have a contract that says, if you have 1 billion streams on Spotify, you're not entitled to any of the money. That's a contract that you might sign.
Yeah.
Or you could have a contract that says, I get $1 million per MP3 that sells. These are just contracts between the creator, the producer, the writer, a publisher, a label. There are standards. There are statutory rates which are established. But the way Pandora and Spotify pay out, it is so complicated, and it changes constantly, these algorithms. There's almost no way to say, hey, guess what? Based on how many spins, you owe me this much money. People seem to correlate that there's a direct payment relationship, a number, an amount. There are only the number of spins, and then a pool, and then a division, and then accounting, right?
Yeah, this is where that trope has been bothering me since I first read it many years ago, and it just keeps getting relived, and so I was a little frustrated.
What if I were to tell you that Pharrell made 100,000 times more on those spins than anybody else has made?
That would be a lot.
Yeah, great. Well, then he's done really, really well.
Yeah, I didn't see him groveling for mercy or anything. So we don't have a lot of time left. I think I want to throw one more to the panel and right to the audience with the Q&A. So to the panel, real quick, optimistic or pessimistic on the future of blockchain in the music industry, and let's give a time frame of 10 years so that we at least give some buffer that it's not going to happen tomorrow.
Blockchains will eat the world.
Okay.
The technology is so accessible that you can make one in your basement, in your garage. The only thing you need is a working brain and the internet. And with that sort of barrier to entry, there's nothing that's going to stop this technology from being applied everywhere in modern life, or, in any length of time frame.
Got it. Well, it sounds like the Tapscots would probably agree with you. Come on.
Yeah, I'm generally an optimistic person. I'm optimistic in 10 years that this will progress. I mean, I think there is going to be some degree of collision because everyone's going to say, hey, my blockchain's better. But as Bryce said, if there's something in there that's going to translate or allow all the blockchains to speak, then that's going to really soften the blow when those collisions actually occur. So I think 10 years, hopefully we'll all work it out. In the meantime, I'm going to build a blockchain in my basement.
Yeah, I was going to say, to see that, it will be, we have yet to see two blockchains talk to each other. So I am optimistic on that front, but Peter, what's your optimism or pessimism?
Blockchain technology is perhaps as revolutionary as the internet itself. And one could have been asked 20 years ago, 15 years ago, do you feel positive that the internet is going to be a good thing or not? And as time goes on, we see both negative impact socially, some cases positive impact commerce-wise. There's never a simple answer as to what effect this may have, but I can tell you that I am certain, as one can be, that this is not going away. I remember people in my lifetime saying, yeah, man, the internet is a fad. and I looked at them and I thought, well, that's the last job you'll have. lost their job very soon thereafter.
Cool.
But
So-
the point is, this is the next revolution in global and independent, decentralized economy, technology, innovation. There's no question that we're already implementing it in the music industry, and it'll be fun to see what becomes the standard.
Cool. All right. So with that, let's see if anybody in the audience has any questions, and we will circulate a mic if there are questions. Are there questions? Maybe we should start there.
So Peter would like to see the audience.
Oh, okay. Can you see people?
Can you see everyone?
I can see people, beautiful people.
Okay.
Any questions? Oh, okay.
Stand up.
Please,
If you've
and
got
then
a
I'll pass you the
question.
mic so you can be heard. Thank you.
So in this 5 to say 10-year horizon, how do you see DSPs consuming the blockchain to be able to provide, services to the end user who wants to consume music?
That is really up to them. I mean, honestly, there's the music industry is so risk averse to new technologies that DSPs, even the Silicon Valley favorites, have kind of inherited that a little bit. And
I'm sorry, could you say what DSPs are just for the audience in general, just in case?
Digital service providers.
Very good.
they're the Pandoras and the Spotify's
Got
and
it.
yeah.
Thank you.
And honestly, what I would really like to see is I would like to see DSPs step up and get involved. What do you need? What is it that DSPs look for instead of having the blockchain technology space play a guessing game and get it wrong? And come and engage. Spotify and Media Chain we felt was may or may not be a benefit to the industry at large, but it starts that conversation because we're going to begin to learn what are the exact data concerns that DSPs have, and it's just data. We can make it in any format that folks need, but DSPs have been sitting on the sideline as far as participating and saying, well, we would kind of like this much. So I think maybe in the next 6 to 8 months, maybe we'll have those dialogues start to expand a little bit more and we'll be able to get there. I mean, it's still just that new.
So, I've been watching what's happening in the financial services space. I've also been watching what's happening in supply chain space. And I think that there's great optimism for this technology. But I think where things tend to fall a little bit short is that there is a lack of appreciation for the role that centralized models have played and the benefits that they bring into the systems that they have.
Absolutely.
And so sometimes this notion of decentralization gets taken to extremes that loses sight of the problems we're trying to solve. And so I think that as we move into this, I think engagement is clearly important. There has to be a participant. But I don't think that the answers are clear cut yet. And so in no industry that I've looked at, and I'm now spending time in several looking at what's happening with blockchains, I've seen yet to be firm proof that other than payments, because of some very specific problems with censorship resistance, double spend problem, which were computer science problems, these are not easily reflected in other places. There's also the notion of a bearer asset. And a bearer asset, the thing is what you're protecting for. And I don't think that in a lot of these things we're doing representations of the thing that we're protecting for.
Well,
and that's the challenge, right?
And you struck on something that I think that we can start to elaborate a little bit further, in that honestly the last thing that anybody is concerned about, except for the DSPs, is the data the DSPs get. Because inside of all of this blockchain technology hoo-ha is the ability for tokenization, which is the buzzword that everyone's starting to use in the last couple of weeks. Where if we can take, for instance, something like Peter's data, that rights data, and then tokenize it. Now you have a fungible asset that you can trade the rights in a peer-to-peer fashion. There are entire financial derivatives that can be created from the data that rights management on a blockchain allows. And suddenly we can repurpose all of those fun FinTech toys into an entirely new economy based on intellectual property rights.
So Bryce, let's push down just because we're talking. Can we just touch on that for a second? Because, you know, the tokenization of the thing isn't necessarily the thing itself. So what I mean by that, we're talking about data around the song, and we're talking about the song itself. I don't envision these blockchains storing every song that's ever been created. These will likely live in
Really?
databases. Oh, so your position here is that
Not only is that my position, but
Okay.
we actually have a provisional patent to do just that.
I stand corrected.
And it's not just a blockchain.
Uh-huh.
The blockchain stores data.
Yes.
A blockchain is not an efficient manner of storing streaming media.
Right.
IPFS is. IPFS uses cryptographic functions that are very, very easily repurposed inside of blockchain technology. So now we can begin to create IPFS and blockchain smart contracts. Now that's literally what my patent does.
Got it.
So if you can prove you
I'd
have
like,
rights.
I'd like to chime in here.
Please.
I'd like to chime in, guys, and just use an interesting analogy. Tokenization, I love this concept that Bryce is talking about, and it takes, you know, Patreon and all of these GoFundMe models to a whole other level. But an interesting comparison is looking at baseball cards, which become separate of the players themselves, separate of the game itself. Valuable, they have a currency, they have a value, they can be traded, they can be redeemed, they can be sold, they can be purchased,
They have
right?
scarcity.
They have scarcity, right? But the difference is that in that model, you have to be a baseball player in order to create a baseball card. You have to be in the major league, and you have to have a team, and you have to have a name, and you have to have some notoriety. In the new world, and with blockchain and independent data, anybody can be a baseball player because they call themselves that, they register themselves that, and they then in turn can have their own card created. And it's completely open to anybody, anywhere. And that's the beauty. And the fact is, as long as there are rights, those rights can be tokenized by any human being in the world. You don't even have to play an instrument to be a songwriter now. You don't have to be talented. You don't have to be good.
Well, and if you think about the ICO market, and then you take something like Patreon, and you combine it with the ICO market, I want to make an album. I'm Metallica, and I want to make an album, and I want to crowdfund that album. And if you have one of my tokens when the album launches, you know, as we're developing the album, we can give you specific windowing on the songs for a limited period of time, and we'll take your feedback on it, and then you can get a copy. And then that blockchain, it proves you were there. You can't, you know, when you talk about fandom, you know, this is the ultimate fan tool. You can not only prove you discovered new music, but you can prove when you were there, how early in the process you were there. You can even trade that to somebody else. So this has a real sentimental value to it because of the way people already
It
view
also
music.
has a commercial value.
Sure.
If one of the girls in the front row is making an album and I want to buy a token that's going to give me a percentage or a participation of your record that you sing, then by selling that token and me buying it, I may not be a rights holder, I'm not part of the copyright, but I'm going to participate in the revenue streams that you generate with that copyright. And it's a whole new concept. You know, for so long people have been trying to trade music as commodity, but because of law, it couldn't be done. And then not that long ago, people like Royalty Exchange and these other groups have figured out a way to basically rent revenue streams. You're a writer. You don't own your own publishing, but you're going to get some money from ASCAP or BMI over the next 10 years. For 30 grand, I'm going to buy those revenue streams from you. You're going to redirect them to me. And by taking all of this money from me now, you're still the writer. You will always still be the writer. You can't change the nature of your rights, but where the money goes from those rights can now be redirected. And that's a whole other application to Bryce's concept of tokenization of rights.
And that stuff is working right now. I mean, literally, you go to royaltyexchange.com and you can see these financial transactions happening without a blockchain right now.
So Peter, I know you wanted to ask questions of the audience. This is your chance.
Thank you, Kamal. I would love to know a little bit about who came out today. And like, for example, the guy that asked about the DSPs, what is he doing?
So Tony and I actually both work at Pandora. So we're here to learn more about the blockchain and the future. And I would love, this is great, thank you for coming. I would love to know what types of resistance in any respect have you seen from the majors regarding any kind of direct accounting or direct licensing to other stakeholders?
I wish I could answer that one, as I'm not in that department at our company, but I can answer a question that you asked earlier on. I don't know if anybody else would like to answer that immediate question, but earlier on you spoke of what do the DSPs need, and I can answer that.
Great.
Everybody watching this, the blockchain space is about to start taking notes.
One of this. Earlier on you pointed out accurately the linear nature of the digital supply chain and how many steps along the way before it loops back to a payment. I'll echo that and agree and say it's even worse. I would consider it to be two complete separate paths. The main portions of the supply chain being the recording side, and the main side of the other wing of it being the publishing side. Right from the moment of creation in the recording studio, those two separate, and never the twain shall meet again until the digital service providers need to figure out who the songwriter is. It's not in the major labels' interest, and actually this does get to your question, it's not in the major labels' interest to facilitate the payment of publishing.
Yeah.
And we've asked many times of the major labels, will you please pass along publishing data, most importantly the linkages between the recording and the publishing. But it's not in their financial interest to do so, and they've said clearly we need to be incentivized to do that. I think that a need in the industry that the blockchain can provide is to provide a mechanism for linkages between recordings and publishing, so that we know who wrote those songs. And to do it in a decentralized way enables us to go straight to the source of truth rather than having to do it linearly all the way through the different steps. It's weird because the music industry in one way is already decentralized.
To a large degree, yeah.
Because there's two halves of it that almost compete with each other in a certain sense. And it's frustrating because we want to pay people. I serve on multiple boards.
When I grew up, the whole game and the advantage that I had as a writer and a self-publisher was that you know, when your song became a hit on the radio, the label didn't get a dime from that. The artist didn't get a dime from that. It was only the publishers and the writers. Then streaming reversed it and created that as what's considered to be based on a mechanical royalty, which is completely controlled and owned by the labels. And I'm still, to this day, and I mean, I've been on this for my whole life, and I'm still confused as to what the accounting is to a publisher from say, for example, Pandora Streams versus to a label from Pandora Streams. Does Pandora account to both separately?
Yes.
Wow.
Because they're two separate ownership streams. And so we have a direct deal with the record label. In our new model, we've switched to a direct deal model recently. We pay directly to the the major labels for the recording side of it. The publishing side of it needs to go through entities in order to get to them, because you don't have that information in the recording that we receive.
Now, but is that based on what was termed a public performance to a publisher via PR? Are the PROs involved?
I think so. I'm more on the recording side myself. I believe so.
I mean, this is all still changing quicker than anybody could believe, and it's fascinating how the value of certain, like you said, separate revenue rights, publishing versus master recording income, have flipped in value back and forth because of something as simple as a DSP or a service paying differently, and I think that whatever's going to happen in the future, as long as a blockchain may help people to see it more transparently, it's a positive thing.
Well, but this is, I think, part of the point of the fact that the problems are. Look, you just mentioned something that we've just been here for an hour that our expert just kind of learned about. You were just kind of hearing about too. And so I think that this is part of the challenge I have when I think of blockchain solving things. The problems are not yet well or clearly understood.
That's right.
For us to be applying a technology to solving them.
Unless,
is it
I mean,
a fit? Well, I'm still trying to figure out, is it a fit?
I really want to touch on that, because I believe you're right to a degree, in the sense that there's this sort of mentality about blockchain technology, about the immutability and well, okay, that's definitely possible. However, it's still just data, and you can make a transaction that says change this 1 to a 0, and then suddenly that data is something else. So to ignore, to not begin to explore, and this is really where all of these projects that are currently going on are beneficial, because they're all going to carry that ball down the field just a few inches. And we're watching all these projects, and we're seeing what works and what doesn't, and we're listening to the industry side and saying, well, okay, that changed, which kind of outdates this entire set of thinking that people, and eventually there's going to come a point of convergence, where the needs of the industry and the solutions that the blockchain industry can provide are going to meet, and then things are really going to start to change very quickly.
So guys, we've got a question.
Yeah, please.
Just a quick question. Michael Petrarski, Invest.com. We focus on blockchain for payments, and rightly so, because it's FinTech and we all like money. But you mentioned data at least 8 times answering one of the questions. And you also said that it's all about, I was there, that's what blockchain shows. Do you think that blockchain can also improve security of the files, as in people accessing files legally? Do you think blockchain is going to play the role? I guess that's not an issue in the US so much, but outside of the US, people still.
Well, and we're never going to get rid of piracy. You can always plug something in to your device and then record it. Like right here on a table is a digital recorder. That piracy is never going away. What we can do instead is incentivize authenticity, because now we have this entire cryptographic chain of custody, and the more data attached to a track, the more reliable the rest of that data is. Because if in order for the next person to sign off on it, they are essentially signing off on everybody else that came before them. So in that case, absolutely. And when you talk about payment rails, and this is when we start to get into things like digital identity and cryptographic identity, if you have all of if a consumer now has like their music ID, and somewhere out there in the cloud on some blockchain somewhere are all of the transaction records for every piece of music they've ever paid for ever, and the licensing that payment then allows them to do, that was literally part of our patent, where we were able to say, now we can create something that looks and acts and behaves like a compact disc, except it's not physical. The only thing missing is that physical component. The rights extend and exist for as long as that data is available in the universe. And now we see why blockchain technology really starts to benefit from a consumer angle, especially from the FinTech side, because now we're talking about blockchain-based payment rails that provide the entry point into proving right to those licenses.
So Peter, could you respond?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, I mean, if you're talking about DRM, like protection, security of assets, you know, certainly if enough people were to adopt one standard and that were to be controlled by devices, the way Apple controls iTunes, for example, then yes, it could help security. I think that again, I think that that's a ways away, because for it to succeed in the first place, it has to embrace all the systems that exist. What is Apple's incentive to go on a blockchain when they are essentially a closed system? They have handsets, they've got hardware, they've got internal distribution, and at that point, they got rid of all of their security. They literally made it. They literally stopped encoding and preventing people from making copies of their own material, because once again they have that whole supply chain. It's a really interesting question whether DRM is even relevant anymore. I want to say that there's a world that awaits us where it shouldn't make a bit of difference, where there's other ways of monetizing social activity, human crowdsourcing of resources, things that are not just directly related to the value of carrying a piece of data, right? In the world of blockchain, every user has every piece of data, ideally. Literally the entire blockchain on a thumb, you know, on your fingernail. And from there you can determine what they're allowed to do with that based on that chain.
That's beautiful. Thanks, Peter. We've got one more question here.
Evening, Peter. I have a question for you. This is Anil, and I'm a curious spectator. So how easy do you think, you mentioned that you have a platform, DigiRAMP, I believe?
Yeah.
So how easy is it for a platform such as yours to integrate into a blockchain such as Infinity Music or Tao blockchain or what have you?
Well, it's impossible today, but the next step is to create APIs for everybody to be able to integrate. And this is, again, what I was talking about. This is a prototype which created a map of the entire business of rights. And even though it's a closed system, so to speak, it's already being adapted and used in ways I cannot even imagine. People are selling weed club cannabis subscriptions up there. People are selling Rolls Royces up there. People are selling solar panels up there, right? But the point I'm making is create APIs for everybody to get in and out, and whether that's with Bryce, who I'm looking forward to working with on figuring out how to get my data, or I should say your data, to his platform. We like to think of ourselves as an open system that anybody's allowed to use. It's a suite of tools, and we want to make sure that the creation and that data that you manage with your set of tools that we created can then be used through APIs to any other system. It could be aggregation to Pandora, for all we care. It could be aggregation to the Tao network. Whatever it is, it's giving people a portal and access with their own content, whoever the stakeholders may be. That includes Universal, that includes the girl next door. It's everybody in that ecosystem. and giving them the tools to then be able to connect to the rest of the world.
Thank you. One last question, sorry.
Gentlemen, hi, my name is Tom Zimmeroff. I'm the founder of a startup in the photography space. As someone curious and a little bit befuddled still by all of this, can you recommend any places to go and perhaps read some good user case studies on how this works or how it has worked successfully for someone? And the second part of my question is, do you know of anybody working on this in the photography space, both in terms of payments and rights management?
I want to just mention that DigiRAMP stands for Digital Rights and Asset Management Platform. And it's already, here's a quick anecdote for you. I went to Flickr to do a creative, you know what Flickr is?
Yeah.
Okay, I went to Flickr to do a Creative Commons license for our landing page slideshow, okay? I got these rights, I put them up. A week later, I get a horrific
A letter from
email.
Getty, right?
A letter from a photographer in Spain saying, you call yourself a digital rights asset management platform to benefit the artist, and yet your front page is plagiarizing my work and you've infringed on my copyright. And I said, whoa, 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 whoa. First of all, I have a license, I can show it to you. And secondly, it sounds to me like your work wound up on a platform that maybe you're not aware of that gave me the right to redistribute it. I said, but I'll tell you what, let's get rid of Flickr entirely. And because it was on DigiRAMP and he was able to contact me directly, I literally did a license of $50 for perpetual use of 10 of his images, and now that's our front page. And that was a brilliant example of how direct licensing and direct accounting really can work, as long as people have a way of knowing when and who is using what.
And just to kind of bookend on it, I mean, the reason why I'm excited to work with folks like Peter is because they already have it. And I'm going to say this and it's going to upset a lot of folks, no blockchain system for digital media delivers as promised right now. None of them. They're all still lacking certain things in order to fulfill their primary purpose. So when you ask about case studies or some of the typical implementations, honestly, the ones without the blockchains are the ones you really need to look at, because the ones that use blockchains are going to operate very similar to those because they already work. There's a certain amount of not reinventing the wheel that's going to occur because these systems are already efficient. They're already designed to perform these tasks and do them very well. And with a little bit of cryptography and a blockchain underneath it, then suddenly it becomes this decentralized ecosystem.
Thank you.
And that's what I want to talk to Bryce about, is exactly that. Taking this last question is the case study, right there. You're the case study, my friend.
I mean, that's literally how new, and wow, thanks, Peter. We will definitely talk after the panel.
Thank you so much, everyone. This has been one of the best panels we've ever had, and I really appreciate it. Thank you, Pierre, for moderating. And thank you, audience, for asking questions. And thank you, Peter, for taking the time on Skype to share with us. Appreciate it.
That was a pleasure, and I want to thank everybody that participated in this, and for all those who weren't able to ask questions via Facebook and all. Certainly, you can feel free to reach out to myself, and I imagine I speak for the rest of us. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thanks, everyone.